Welcome to XpoNorth Digital Shorts. Today we have a very special guest, one of my favorite guests. Pippa, welcome.
Hi there, Jessica. It's great to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
You're welcome. Pippa is a writer and a science fiction writer, but fiction about science. And she was also a scientist. So Pippa, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Okay, so I started professional life as an astronomer many years ago. I did a PhD in astronomy at Edinburgh University at the observatory on Blackford Hill. And at the time, I wasn't really interested in writing about science. But as I kind of grew a bit disenchanted with academic life, and I realized that it wasn't for me, I'd enjoyed it very much. And I did some interesting research on distant galaxies in the universe. And I had interesting times going off to use telescopes around the world and collecting data and fitting mathematical models.
I'm so jealous. That's so fun.
It was fun. I mean, the travel was interesting. But I realized increasingly that whilst I really enjoyed writing science, about the science that I was doing, there was a lot that I wasn't writing about in terms of what it actually felt like to do the science. Quite often the way that the scientific process is presented in academia and also in the popular sort of scientific sort of media as a sort of very straightforward narrative. You know, you have an idea and then you do the idea and then you get a result and everything kind of works out. And when you're actually doing science, you kind of realize it's a much more complex, messy, human, emotional process. And I realized that I was getting very interested in writing fiction. And I realized this would absolutely be a really interesting topic to investigate through fiction. Essentially the psychology of scientists and how their personal lives and their professional lives kind of interact. So that's what I really started writing when I was sort of thinking about my first novel and what I really wanted to kind of investigate in my first novel. So that's really what mostly makes my writing tick. It's about looking at real science as opposed to science fiction, which can of course be made up science, sort of real science that has already happened, and looking at it in more detail and finding the gaps in the official history and sort of exploring those gaps with fiction, which I think fiction is very good at doing in all sorts of ways, not just with science, but with history, for example. Historical fiction does exactly the same thing. So that's really kind of what I'm interested in. It's not the only thing I'm interested in. In fact, I'm branching away from that a little bit at the moment. And I do write some science fiction as well, sort of more speculative stuff set in the future. But yeah, that's mainly what I do in my writing.
And Pippa, you do, which is so interesting. You're such a diverse writer. You write articles, you write short fiction, you write novels. I remember being so excited being in the Edinburgh train station at Waverley and turning around and seeing one of your novels in like the best-selling book section. And it was about the woman who was trying to figure out the nature of the universe. And it didn't occur to me that you are actually the closest thing I know to Jodie Foster in Contact. Basically, you were going around these big observatories. You're an amazing storyteller. I think that for our XpoNorth audience, we'll list, by the way, some of Pippa's books below so that you can read. She's really quite amazing. Can we talk a little bit about, there's a lot of people at home at the moment with amazing ideas, whether they're scientists, already writers, actors, with idea for a story. How do you get this idea for a story out from your head onto the page successfully?
Successfully. I have a lot of ideas at any one time that are sort of batting around in my head. And sometimes it's really difficult to know what is a separate idea for a separate story, if you like. And quite often what actually makes a story work is when you get two different ideas, you kind of knock them together. And one example of that is a short story I wrote a couple of years ago. And I was doing some I was having to write a short story about the general theory of relativity and how sort of space is curved in the universe. But I was also very interested in the idea about maps and taxi drivers in London and how they have to do this really complex test called the knowledge. They basically have to learn the A to Z of London. And I thought somehow these ideas kept coming together in my head, and I ended up writing a story about a taxi driver and dark matter in the universe. And that can
Brilliant.
be, and I think when you kind of jam two ideas together, this is very kind of physics and analogy, you get an extra kind of energy from that interaction, and that can really help. Practically, I don't think it's really easy to say in advance how a short story is going to work out. And quite often you start with one idea that you're really interested in, and you write it, and you rewrite it, and quite often your end point is actually a long way from your original idea. So what drives the sort of the engine of the story may actually be below the surface. It may be something that never actually appears in the final version of the story. So I'd say to people, if you have an idea, then just pursue it, and don't be afraid to change it. If it's something that's not quite working, just kind of go with the energy of the story and see where it takes you. Don't feel that you have to stick with your original plot, your original idea, your original character. If the story seems to be sort of leading off down another path, then that's fine. And I think it's also really worth sort of pointing out that sometimes short stories kind of come easily, but most often they don't. I've just finished working on one I've done 5 completely different drafts of it. And each draft has been a sort of radical change from, I started off with one idea and then I ended up it's kind of with something utterly different. And that was fine.
How did you know you needed to keep on going?
Because I was bored with a draft, I'd write a draft and it didn't have enough of interest for me, enough energy. It just didn't do quite what I wanted it to do until I got to the point and where I said, yes, this works for me. And it's actually nowhere where I started from, but it's a story with a shape, and it's it feels as kind of gut feeling. I think when I write a story that works, it does what I want it to do. Other people might not agree, and that's entirely up to them. But I get a kind of feeling of satisfaction when I write something that I think works.
That's great. So when you're talking about even following the energy, for people who aren't, I know exactly what you're talking, I know exactly what you mean. For people who aren't used to aligning themselves with that, another way to say it maybe is follow your own curiosity, or figuring out for you what's keeping your interest.
Yes, that's right. I think that's exactly right. Following your curiosity, working out what you're interested in. People quite often, the advice that you quite often hear when you're a writer or setting out and writing is write what you know. And that can be helpful because what you know is often of interest to you. But I think it's perhaps more the fundamental advice is to write what you're interested in. Write about the sort of the odd curiosities that obsess you in life. Like, for instance, the taxi driver test, which at the time, for some reason, I was really interested in and reading loads about. And I don't know why, it was just an odd thing that really kind of gripped me. And I've got some other sort of quirks at the moment that are kind of helping me write. And I think it's also worth reminding people that writing is a lengthy process, especially writing a short story. Even though it might look short on the page, it can take a lot of work to get it to that stage. And don't be afraid of that. Enjoy the process. Don't think so much about the end results, especially when you're starting out. Just go with the flow and just enjoy the process of writing, because that really is the best thing about it.
You pretty much give the best advice I've heard about writing. You've helped me in the past with my writing. You're very generous about, thank you, about opening your own process up and being very articulate about it. Are you someone who feels comfortable sharing early drafts with other people? How do you let people in on the process for folks at home who have an idea? What kind of advice do you give them about either protecting their idea or showing it to other people?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really good to get feedback from people, but it's got to be people that you trust, who are not just trust from point of view like intellectual property, but just who you think might be able to give you interesting feedback, or useful feedback, or constructive feedback. and quite often that is maybe not your family, for example. I would never show any of my drafts to my family. And but I do have some trusted friends who are also writers, and I've known them a long time, and we're very able to give each other sort of honest, constructive, supportive feedback. You don't want to be sort of slammed down. You don't want to be told that that a story doesn't work. You know, you need to be given guidance on how to sort of help improve it. So I think it's also really interesting and perhaps nice just to sort of share, to give each other feedback, people who are at the sort of same stage as you. So if you're sort of starting out in writing, then joining a writing group is super helpful. It just means that you're surrounded by people who are taking this seriously and who are actively engaging with what you are trying to do and taking your work seriously. And that's probably the most important thing. So going back to the original question, I tend to show a decent first draft, something that I am reasonably happy with. I know it's not at the end, it's not a sort of final polished draft, but it does most of what I want it to do, so that anyone giving feedback on it, maybe they don't need to do any kind of line edits or sort of like sort of fine structure feedback, but they can give feedback on the overall story and the characterization and the sort of world building, so I can see whether it works for them. And I've got a kind of variety of people and we give each other feedback, and that's super helpful, because writing can be quite a sort of lonely process. So if you just get together with friends and sort of help each other, it can help break down some of that feeling that you're just sort of sitting there all by yourself in your room.
Yeah, that's really...
no one's ever going to see it.
But that's so great. There is a Yiddish phrase that I just learned, so I'm going to butcher it. But it's min was nicht al halbe Arbeit. I think it means one shouldn't show a half-done job. So coming to a place where you feel comfortable with it and then showing it to people,
yes,
basically.
That's right.
That's really, and then what do you do afterwards? So you have this thing, the amazing thing that you've created, especially for first-time writers. You finally found a draft that you're happy with. What do you do once it's complete?
That's a really good question, because ideally you want to submit it, you want to get it out into the world, it's your baby, you want people to read it. So in the short stories, of course, you have a whole variety of different avenues that you can use. Short story magazines, primarily in Britain and in the States. It takes a lot of research actually to place a short story in its sort of ultimate home, if you like, because each magazine has got its own sort of ethos, its own. The editors are interested in different things, so you have to do a lot of reading of a short story magazines in order to work out which would be appropriate for yours, but that's worth it. Okay. And also, of course, when you're reading short story magazines, you're learning about the craft too. So I submit stuff to magazines, sometimes to competitions, but they can be pretty, that can be pretty painful if you don't get placed. So I think and it's worth remembering, of course, that most of the time you're going to get rejected. We all get rejected, and it's pretty painful, to be honest. And I think there's a kind of idea or a meme going around at the moment that you should aim to get rejected 100 times every year, which I actually really like. I think that's a really sort of positive way. It means that you keep having to get your work out there.
Yeah. And
if you're getting it rejected 100 times, then it means it's being read by people. It means that you're editing and you're doing it and you're being active. So it can hurt to be rejected. And I got something rejected recently that I felt quite sore by, because I thought it was brilliant.
I bet it was.
But it's fine. It just wasn't the right home for it. So I kind of allow myself to feel a bit sore for about a few hours, and then I just try and sort of carry on with it. And also, if you're not just working on one short story at a time, so if you submit a short story and then you get off with something else, then at least your brain isn't sort of solely focused with the one thing that you want to get published somewhere. So you think, well, never mind, it's been rejected there, but never mind, I can send it here and I can get on with that story. So
But that's so brilliant. I want to highlight how brilliant you are for a second, because it's one thing to plot an amazing story, which you do, and create really wonderful characters. It's a whole other thing to explain science, not only well, but in an entertaining way that has like parallels and metaphors, and you're able to fuse the two. It's really pretty extraordinary. And I have to ask, although you are welcome to say no, I know a lot of people don't like talking about things that they're working on, but are you working on anything currently that we can get excited about that's in the pipeline?
well, that's actually a really interesting question, because I've just recently moved to Germany, where I am right now. I'm in my little flat in
From
Frankfurt.
Edinburgh, is that
From
correct?
Edinburgh, that's right, from Edinburgh to Germany. And the reason I came here, partly, one of the reasons, was to work on a non-fiction piece. I've been writing more and more non-fiction essays over the past year or so, again, weaving together science with narrative and history. And one of the things I want to do when I'm here in Frankfurt is to explore my grandfather's history, because he came from Frankfurt and I never knew him. And there's a tale somewhere to be told about trying to understand the past of your own family and the past of the universe. But when we look at the night sky, we're looking back in time. And so we have a good idea of cosmic time, but we don't always have a good idea of the sort of detailed time around us. Sort of literally, I'm surrounded by it. So this is my project for the time being, is to write a long non-fiction piece, weaving together family history with sort of universal history.
Oh, Pippa, that's so beautiful. That brought a tear to my eye. That's really lovely. Do you feel, this is getting off topic and we're running out of time, but do you feel that there is this epigenetic inheritance that you have that might guide you through the streets of Frankfurt in a way that maybe first time people who are visiting there don't have?
I don't know, to be honest. I mean, I've been trying to write about this. Does this feel like home to me? Do I feel at home?
Yeah.
And I'm really not sure. I like Germany. I spend a lot of time in Germany. I have German citizenship. So is it my home? There's a massive language barrier still, because my German isn't great. Yeah, the whole epigenetics question is interesting. I don't know. I think I reserve judgment. The one epigenetic thing that I definitely don't have is the German addiction to bureaucracy. Like epic failure at, and that's caused a lot of headaches over the past couple of months.
I bet it has, and I wonder too with epigenetics. There's so much that's unknown, so it can become magical thinking, really. But my guess is you probably don't inherit subtleties of a place. There's more motivation to inherit extremes, either extreme fear or extreme attraction to something. So maybe that really subtle ground of philosophical questioning about what is home is something that's going to be your journey to kind of figure out.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, certainly in epigenetics, the science, people inherit trauma. The trauma that happens in one generation is passed down through not the genes themselves don't change, but the way they're expressed changes. Yeah, that's right. So yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly what I'm going to be exploring here.
Yeah, I don't know if you feel this way. This could be also strange, but in terms of this COVID time where we're all in lockdown and things are a bit heightened, I notice I'm a pretty anxious person when things are fine. Mm-hmm. And when there's a crisis, I'm like, I got this. I'm good. Like my inheritance is used to this. We have generations of traumatic events happening. Do you find that you're at the moment, can you create in a crisis? Do you find it easy to write with all this going on?
Yeah, it's not bad at the moment, actually. I mean, I'm living in a bedsit with my partner. We're both working. The flat is so tiny, we have to work on the same table. There is literally nowhere else to go. And because he's sitting there working away diligently all day, sort of clack, 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 I feel that I have to work too. I can't just like slope off and sort of, well, I did yesterday, but mostly I just have to sit there and work too. So it's not been too bad. Perhaps work is a bit of an outlet, just getting on with the writing. I've got no idea what's going to happen with a lot of the writing I'm doing. Because I'm guessing the publishing industry is going to be pretty badly hit in the future. Mm-hmm. I am actually able to do some writing, and it does distract me. So yeah, I think you're right. The sort of major, I mean, I do get very anxious about the whole sort of future of everything, but just right now, the here and now, our days are so sort of quiet and mundane that's actually quite productive for the writing.
Yeah, I think so too, which is again another reason why folks at home, if they have an idea, now's the time to really
Yeah.
start it if they
Yeah.
want.
Yes. But don't put pressure on yourself. Just enjoy the process.
Yeah, that's a Pippa, those couldn't end on better words. Now, really quickly, by the way, we can't wait to see what you're creating. Cannot wait to see what you're creating, Jeremy. Before we go, what is the most important tool that you have at the moment at your disposal for folks at home again who are attempting to write? What is a tool that you can recommend that you find useful?
So I usually work in a library, and I find that really lovely to be surrounded by books. Of course, I can't do this at the moment. I'm just working at home. To kind of insulate myself from the world, I either work with a pen and pencil, a notebook, or I work on a laptop that doesn't have internet access. And I think that's really essential to help your creativity really focus down. It's too easy to get distracted by the internet, especially at the moment. So yeah, so I guess my tool would be an absence of tool, sort of anti-tool. Yeah, and it's just and when you start to write and you're not distracted by things, it's a lovely feeling. It's very sort of just positive feeling.
Oh, Pippa, well, Germany's lucky to have you. We miss you in Edinburgh, and can't wait to read more. Pippa, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's been lovely, Jessica. Thank you. I hope to see you.